27 school shootings since the start of the year in the United States. Not 27 shootings, 27 school shootings. Not all of them fatal, but still, 10 days after Buffalo, the news cycle turns to Texas with the familiar ritual of shock, grief, outrage before counter-arguments about mental health, the responsibility of the parents. Other nations have strong gun cultures, but only in America do so many die, and can you legally buy the same military-grade weapons currently used in battle in Ukraine? Does a nearly $20 billion industry matter more than the basic safety of school kids? Is it a sign of an America in decline, or the price to pay for a nation whose success is forged by a cult of personal freedom, of a First and Second Amendments of the Constitution that in the digital age sometimes seem to put free speech and the right to bear arms above all else, no matter the consequences? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking about the weaponization of America. Joining us from Richmond, Virginia, Andrew Goddard, whose son survived the 2007 Virginia Tech University shooting. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you.
From Durham, North Carolina, Jake Charles, Executive Director of the Duke University Center for Firearms Law. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
From New York City, welcome back, Crystal Fleming, Professor of Sociology at Stony Brook University.
Thanks for having me.
And we're joined by Bree McEwen, Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Toronto. Thanks for stopping by.
Yes.
The France 24 debate, where you could join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Once again, it's the whole world that's watching, the whole world that's shocked. A candlelight vigil by students at a secondary school in India's northern city of Amritsar. The murder of 19 children and 2 teachers at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, near San Antonio, catching everyone's attention. The gunman first killed his grandmother and then crashed his car in the school parking lot before targeting a single 4th grade classroom. Caroline Lambolet has more.
The town of Uvalde in Texas is reeling from the shock. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed on Tuesday when 18-year-old Salvador Ramos opened fire on Robb Elementary School, leaving a trail of devastation behind him.
It's just breaking my heart. I just didn't ever expect anything like that to happen here in Uvalde. And then the person that did this, he used to go to high school here. I mean, he was going to high school here. He was a high school student here.
Right now?
Right now. And his grandmother, I know her, the one he shot.
The massacre has revived the debate about gun laws in the country, where such tragedies are frequent.
I spent my career as a senator and a vice president working to pass common sense gun laws. We can and won't prevent every tragedy, but we know they work and have positive impact. When we passed the assault weapons ban, mass shootings went down. When the law expired, mass shootings tripled.
It's the 27th school shooting to take place in the U.S. this year, and it comes just 10 days after a shooting in Buffalo, New York, that killed 10 people.
Andrew Goddard, how do you explain it?
Well, thank you. It's not something that's easy to explain if you're outside of the US culture. But one of the things we don't have to ask is, could this happen again? It's just a case of when it will happen and where and how many people will die. The culture of the gun in the US has been very strong for a long time, but only in recent years it seems to have been distorted into some sort of an extreme position where anyone should be allowed to have any weapon of any capacity, of any type, in any location. That was never the intent of our Constitution, and our Constitution, unfortunately, is being distorted in a way that seems to prevent us from taking any action whatsoever. So I don't see anything changing until we get the general population to believe that the Second Amendment does not support or condone the type of violence that we're seeing in our society.
Jake Charles, can you remind our viewers what the Second Amendment, which was written in the late 18th century, states, and can you explain what Andrew talked about a moment ago, how there's been this sort of anything goes mantra when it comes to selling weapons that's gone full throttle in recent years.
Absolutely. So the Second Amendment's just 27 enigmatic words. It says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And it's really the latter half of that amendment that's gotten the most play in popular culture and even in the Supreme Court's decision about what it means. So as you said, it was ratified in 1791. It didn't play much role in restricting governmental authority over firearms regulation for the first couple hundred years of American existence. And it wasn't until 2008 that the Supreme Court says those 27 words protect an individual's right to have firearms unconnected to any service in the militia, or unconnected to any militia purposes. And really, since then, and the movement that led to that decision in 2008 and the aftermath of that decision, we have seen, as Andrew said, a gun rights movement that has been expanding the ways that guns are protected in states, even far beyond what the Supreme Court has said the Second Amendment itself protects.
Why?
A whole bunch of reasons. Some of them have to do with political polarization in the United States and the way that there used to be in the past more Democrats who were in favor of gun rights and more Republicans who were in favor of gun regulation. And now each party is for the most part in their separate camps. And that if you're a Democrat, you're more likely to be in favor of gun regulation. If you're a Republican, you're more likely to be in favor of gun rights. So that's stopped some of the compromise that we had in the past on these issues. And then we also can't ignore the role of advocacy groups. So the NRA, but other advocacy groups as well, have been really successful in generating an ideology and an identity around gun rights and gun rights activism. And in recent years, we've seen them very successfully win state legislative races, and where all the action is happening, or most of the action is happening on gun, is in state legislatures around the country, with Texas among 24 other states who've gotten rid of permit requirements for concealed carrying of handguns in just the last several years.
Crystal Fleming, last week in this very studio, we were talking about Buffalo and this concept of the well-oiled militia that dates back to the 19th century. And it's if everybody's armed and the discourse, as you just heard there, is becoming more and more polarized, where does it lead?
Well, I think it leads us back to long-standing traditions in American culture that have valorized guns as a symbol of power, and especially in our history as a symbol of white male power. But it's become so institutionalized that it's become a broad symbol of empowerment that's just deeply entrenched in our culture. And I want to be clear, because we are still reeling from the domestic terrorist attack in Buffalo targeting Black people. But we are dealing with a long, ongoing history of white supremacy that is directly tied to the Second Amendment. And I want to deepen our conversation here with that historical context, because what doesn't get enough attention is the fact that the Second Amendment, this right to bear arms, was articulated explicitly to empower settlers to target and dominate Indigenous people, to murder Indigenous people, to steal their land for the enrichment of settlers. And it was also articulated to empower white men in particular to dominate Africans and enslaved Africans and their descendants. And that is the bedrock of our politics, of our culture. And it is part of why this right to bear arms and the symbolic power of gun ownership is so deeply entrenched and so seductive in the United States.
Yeah, but of course, we're a far cry from that to this fourth grade elementary school classroom in South Texas.
No, I disagree. I don't think we're far from that at all. I think that we can't understand the proliferation of guns, the lack of organized efforts to enact gun control, which I think should be framed in terms of public health policy. I don't think we can understand these issues without that historical context of the popular use of guns and the proliferation of guns to uphold the infrastructure, really, of settler colonialism and structural racism in the United States. This is not new. It is not new, and it is central and enshrined in our Constitution. And recognizing this is a clue to the kind of change that's necessary. This is not, should not be treated like a political football. This is not just a problem with Republicans in the NRA, but it is definitely a problem with Republicans being aligned with the NRA and the gun lobby. But it's also a problem across the political spectrum where resources have been diverted from public health, from public education, from addressing mental health problems and health disparities more broadly, diverted away from that and into the pockets of the already wealthy, into corporations, and both parties are complicit in that. And again, the gun lobby itself and the corporations that uphold it, they're one of the first success stories in the history of capitalism in the United States. So it may seem far afield from understanding why there are mass shootings occurring in schools at this frequency, but I think if we look back and we extend and deepen our lens, we'll have an understanding of the fact that these are deeply entrenched problems for which there are no easy solutions, but for which we do need massive social change that's going to require advocates of gun control to actually get organized and not just rely on outrage every time this happens.
Prima Kuhn, at the outset of our conversation, you heard Andrew Goddard describe a deep-rooted gun culture in the United States.
Yes.
First of all, what's your personal experience on that?
There is a deep-rooted gun culture in the United States. I actually grew up in northern Michigan, and we got the November 15th off every year of school. Why? Because it's the first day of hunting season. And so that is part of the culture up there. I know my family didn't have guns when I was growing up, but I know lots of people who had guns, but also who did things like part of that culture, right, was things like hunter safety and being careful and, being trained to shoot properly, not taking loaded guns places, et cetera. Some of the kind of dumb things that we see people doing with accidental gun incidents in the United States. But that culture can be appropriated to cover for this culture. And then you get this kind of slippery slope argument like, oh, if they say that we can't have AR-15s, if we can't have all of the ammo that we could possibly want, because every time these shootings happen, the ammo sales go up, right? The gun sales go up because people think, oh, there's going to be a scarcity. I'm not going to be able to get that. So that culture of having maybe a gun for protection of your house, having a gun for hunting, then provides cover for anyone being able to get anything. And then we have issues with this sort of feeling that something's being taken away from them, right? So we have groups on social media that talk about they don't feel like they're the ones in power anymore. To go with what Crystal was saying, right? They feel like power is being taken away from them if we allow equality for everyone. That's not true. That's a falsehood. But when they feel that way, then we get these sort of scenarios where often white men, certainly men, act out in a way that is absolutely horrific. And
he talks again to, you have concomitantly, and you heard Jake Charles mention it, this increasing weaponization and this increasing political polarization. Are the two linked? To describe from what you're saying, it sounds like it.
Well, we see political polarization in lots of countries, and we don't see the kind of horrific shootings that we're getting in the United States on a regular basis. I mean, what did you say, 27 this year?
This is just shootings that took place in schools.
Yeah, just schools. So Buffalo doesn't even count in that number, right? And so can you ask the question again?
The question is there a direct link between a polarized society and all, this weaponization of the United States? Or the way, if I understand Crystal correctly, it's also big business, and we'll talk about that more in a moment.
Definitely big business. But the polarization here we see in the United States, and then it's linked to weaponization because polarization happens in aspects of political identity. And so when we have everyone sort of talking together, and we see this on social media because this is a place where a lot of people can come together to communicate. What we see in some of our research is that the people who post about issues the most are the ones who are ego involved in that issue. They see it as part of who they are and part of their identity. And so it becomes very difficult to introduce gun legislation without getting primaried out of your district, right? They were talking about it being state houses, right? And being primaried out of small districts because people see this as who I am is a gun owner, not just, oh, I am a person who likes to own guns. And so when you get that on social media, you get the people who are very ego involved and who are willing to post sort of low quality arguments in these kinds of things. And this drives the groups apart because they see each other's posts and they think, that's an awful argument. I would never make that. Or they don't know what they're talking about. And they move further to the polls. Now, in America, a huge issue for identity is guns and weapons. And so you get this kind of polarization happening around weapons, and then we see the outcome.
Right. Andrew Goddard, just your reaction on this.
Well, my reaction is that, we're looking at a situation where weaponry has become so deadly, where we can now sell to the general public weapons that were designed to be used on a battlefield, that can fire large numbers of rounds without reloading, that the bullets travel at an enormous speed, and you remember that the speed of the bullet is exponentially more powerful rather than just the size of the bullet. So we're firing bullets in large numbers that are much more deadly than any of our founding fathers could have even imagined. A whole platoon of soldiers in those days couldn't wreak the havoc that one person can wreak with an AR-15 today. And let's face it, the reason we have AR-15s being sold is because the gun industry was seeing a decline in sales for hunting rifles. They were seeing a decline in sales for handguns because people had enough already and they don't wear out as rapidly as they could. And the sale of military-style weapons became a way of saving the gun industry's profits. We had a lot of companies that would have gone out of business had they not switched their production to these weapons of war. And to be perfectly honest, I want soldiers to have weapons of war when they need them. But I don't think in civil society that we have the same situation as you would find on the streets of Fallujah. So I don't think we need the same weaponry available in the hands of civilians.
And by the way, we got at the France 24 debate an email from a public relations firm this morning reaching out to us to offer an interview with the president of National Safety Shelters. It's a company that makes shelters for immediate protection from active shooters and EF5 tornadoes. Again, an illustration, Andrew Goddard, that this is big business if they're selling in-classroom safety shelters. It's all about making money. We're very far from 2007 when your son was caught up in the Virginia Tech shooting. By the way, I have to ask you, how is he? Because I saw that he reportedly suffered from lead poisoning from the bullet wounds.
That's correct. Yes, we have to change people's attitude towards removing bullets. In the old Western movies, you would see someone digging out a bullet after someone was shot. But nowadays, the minimum is done to keep people alive, and bullets are left in place, and they will possibly produce lead poisoning in the future if they're still in position. But I'd like to go back to the question about the sorry, I had a distraction there. The lethality of these weapons. We just need to decide what is an appropriate weapon for defense in the home. And an AR-15 is not that weapon. If you fire it in your home, the bullet can travel through several walls. You don't know who is on the other side of those walls. You could kill somebody across the street by firing, or in the apartment above you or below you by firing a gun in self-defense. And that is crazy. We should have a decision on what type of weapon and what capacity and how many rounds should be available to the civilian public.
Jake Charles, with the gridlock in Congress on this issue, and you spelled out earlier how positions are entrenched. Is it effectively now just up to the states forever?
I don't think that's necessarily the case. It does seem like even though Democrats control all three, or control both houses of Congress and the presidency, doesn't seem like gun legislation is moving, although this incident and the ones in recent weeks may be changing that. I'd say there's a couple pieces of legislation that
Jake,
have
I'm going to interrupt you because we're going to cross quickly to Texas and listen to the governor there speaking.
Children are a blessing. God teaches us that. They're filled with laughter, innocence, and joy. Their love is a gift that parents get to unwrap every single day. Parents in Uvalde had that gift taken away from them, stolen by a demented person. Days before yesterday, when these children were at school, some were receiving awards for perfect attendance. These kids will never attend school again. To say the least, Uvalde has been shaken to its core. Families are broken apart. Hearts are forever shattered. All Texans are grieving with the people of Uvalde, and people are rightfully angry about what has happened. Events like this, they tear at the fabric of a community. Our job is to ensure that the community is not going to be ripped apart. All Texans must come together and support the families who have been affected by this horrific tragedy. What they need now more than ever is our love. What they need is uplifting from all of our fellow Texans and all of our fellow Americans. And let me emphasize something that I know you all know. But the reality is, as horrible as what happened, it could have been worse. The reason it was not worse is because law enforcement officials did what they do. They showed amazing courage by running toward gunfire for the singular purpose of trying to save lives. And it is a fact that because of their quick response, getting on the scene, being able to respond to the gunman and eliminate the gunman, they were able to save lives. Unfortunately, not enough. But I want to make sure that everybody knows, all of the law enforcement agencies and groups that are involved and were involved in this process. The Texas Rangers are leading the investigation, and they are supported by the Texas Department of Public Safety Highway Patrol, the Texas Department of Public Safety Criminal Investigative Division, DPS Aircraft, DPS Intelligence Counter-Terrorism Division, DPS Crime and Victim Support. They're also supported by the Texas Division of Emergency Management, the FBI, as well as multiple federal partners, including the DEA, ATF, HSI, and Border Patrol. And then, of course, the valiant local officials, the Uvalde Sheriff's Department, Uvalde Police Department, Uvalde Independent School District Police, Uvalde County Constables, Uvalde Mayor, the County Judge, Uvalde District Attorney's Office, local public works and surrounding police department, and the San Antonio Police and Fire Department also. Let me walk you through some of the facts of what has happened. There's been a lot of things that have been said. Some are correct, some are incorrect. Let me tell you the best information that we have at this time, understanding, very importantly, that this is an ongoing investigation, and ongoing investigations often reveal new information as those investigations progress. The first thing that happened was that the gunman shot his grandmother in the face. She then contacted police. The gunman fled, and as he was fleeing, he had an accident just outside of the elementary school, and he ran into the school. Officers with the Consolidated Independent School District, they approached the gunman and engaged with the gunman at that time. The gunman then entered a back door and went down 2 short hallways and then into a classroom on the left-hand side. The gunman entered into that classroom, and the classroom was connected internally to another classroom. Border Patrol, Consolidated ISD officers, police, sheriffs, and DPS officers converged on that classroom, and a Border Patrol officer killed the gunman. As I said, Texas Rangers are leading the investigation, joined by federal, state, and local law enforcement officials. At this time, we know that 19 children have lost their lives. 2 faculty members lost their lives. In addition to that, there are 17 people who are injured, but their injuries are not life-threatening. All family members of all of these students and faculty members have been contacted and informed about the circumstances. Officials are working with parents to ensure that their parents are going to be able to see their children. Parents should contact victim services at the county fairplex. We know that there are parents still striving to make a connection. All parents are welcome and urged to contact victim services at the county fairplex. The gunman was 18 years old and reportedly a high school dropout. Reportedly, there has been no criminal history identified yet. He may have had a juvenile record, but that is yet to be determined. There was no known mental health history of the gunman. He used one weapon, which was an AR-15, using 223 rounds. There was no meaningful forewarning of this crime other than what I'm about to tell you. As of this time, the only information that was known in advance was posted by the gunman on Facebook approximately 30 minutes before reaching the school. The first post was to the point of, he said, "I'm going to shoot my grandmother." The second post was, "I shot my grandmother." The third post, maybe less than 15 minutes before arriving at the school, was, "I'm going to shoot an elementary school." I mentioned that during the shootout that took place at the school, in addition to the students and the faculty, there were 3 officers who were injured who all remain in good condition. one deputy sheriff lost a daughter in that school. Before coming out here, we had a long discussion with law enforcement at all levels. We had a discussion with community leaders, elected officials. And I asked the sheriff and others an open-ended question and got the same answer from the sheriff as well as from the mayor of Uvalde. The question was, what is the problem here? And they were straightforward and emphatic. They said, we have a problem with mental health illness in this community. And then they elaborated on the magnitude of the mental health challenges that they are facing in the community and the need for more mental health support in this region. I want to make sure everybody understands the mental health services that are available at this time, with me making one clarifying point in advance that I'm going to redouble down in the aftermath. Whenever anything as shocking and extraordinary and disturbing as this event occurs, there is an urgent need for everybody affected to access mental health. I cannot be more emphatic than saying with great urgency, everybody in this community, I mean everybody, the victims, the families, family members, friends, the law enforcement involved, but the entire community is in utter shock about this. Some physical wounds that were sustained by the officers, they're going to heal in the coming days. The mental and emotional wounds are far harder to see and last far longer. The state of Texas, working with federal and local officials and agencies, we're going to be here for a long, long time. And one key point that we will focus on is making sure that everybody in this community has the access they need for as long as they need it to address with the mental and emotional health care needs that they have. I want to list various agencies and make sure these are made available to the public. The mental health services currently available are from victim services from across the area, from federal, state, and local levels, including the Family Resource Center.
You've been listening to live remarks by the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, who said that, spelled out the circumstances of this mass shooting that took place at an elementary school near San Antonio. Andrew Goddard, a couple of points from what we heard. Obviously, the shock of the community there, something familiar, but also the governor saying there was no known for now mental health problem regarding the shooter, and saying that the problem is mental health in the community. That's what law enforcement there were telling him. What was your reaction when you heard that?
Well, I'm infuriated because that was a spectacular level of hypocrisy. The man himself passed a law last year, signed a law into the books, which allowed anyone in Texas to carry a concealed weapon, a concealed handgun in public, regardless of their background, regardless of whether they have mental illness. And let's face it, mental illness is used as a dog whistle. Not everyone who commits these crimes is mentally ill. They may have aberrant thought, but their brain is working perfectly well. And we have to differentiate between hardware and software problems here. These people are ignoring a huge thing. We can turn schools into fortresses we could have them ringed by the military, and it would cut down on about 1% of the children in this country that are shot to death each year, because only 1% of the children that lose their lives in America to guns are in school at the time. Everybody ignores the 99% that are killed in their own homes or in someone else's home or in the streets. Where are the armed response for that? We can't change things by turning our schools into fortresses and then ignore what's happening outside of our schools. That man is substantially wrong on all of his issues. We have a mental health delivery issue. We have not funded it properly for many, many years. And we don't need to do that proper funding because we're afraid of people with mental illness. We need to do it because we're humanitarians and those people need help. We don't need to victimize people with mental illness by saying that they're the cause of all this violence when they're not. If we got rid of mental illness tomorrow, violence would go down by a tiny fraction. And unfortunately, it's that kind of talk which dissuades people from seeking mental health help. I'm infuriated by listening to this man. I believe he has no grounds other than his position as a governor to say the kind of nonsense that he's been saying. I'm sorry, I'm upset by it.
Yeah, Bree McEwen, he says there was one of the things he said is that the gunman posted to Facebook before and after he shoots his grandmother and before going into the elementary school. And 10 days ago, we had that shooting in Buffalo where it was turned into a political spectacle. Another 18-year-old, this one I believe it was Twitch, the social media,
Twitch?
who live streamed it. In this case, using social media as also a prop in these mass shootings.
Yeah, so this is something we see across these incidents sometimes. One of the first interviews I did when I was in Chicago was about the Facebook murders of the man who was murdered, and they live streamed it on Facebook. And it's very difficult to take that down quickly. And it is hard for us to say what the motivations of those individuals are, but in a sort of gruesome way, it is the same process of when you are doing something and you want people to know about it, you want attention. And, you know, for most of us, it might be, I got a new jacket and I would like to post it on Facebook. And in this case, it's, I'm going to do this horrible crime. And it suggests that it's hard because I think the Buffalo one is a little bit different from this one. This one sounds like impulsivity. I'm going to do this. I'm going to post about it. We got in an accident. He walked into the school. It doesn't sound very planned, even though there is that stopping to post. It does sound very attention seeking. With the Buffalo shooter, we've got other elements of social media in play, right? Like streaming something to Twitch. He had to set that up to get that done. And then he's got other social media elements of kind of radicalization in there as well that seem to be driving some of his behaviors in these sort of polarized racial conversations that we have in the United States.
And do you share the outrage that you heard Andrew Goddard express?
Oh, absolutely. Abbott has, been no friend to public health and has defunded all kinds of health initiatives. And the thing is, a person with mental health problems who needs some help, even if they need help, if they don't have an AR-15, they don't murder 19 children or 19 people. And so it is the beginning of the spin, right? He is starting the argument that they do every single time of, oh, it's a mental health issue. Oh, it's, a good guy with a gun. You heard some of that too, like, oh, good thing law enforcement was there with their guns, but they didn't stop them from going into the building. And if that kid didn't have an AR-15, you wouldn't need law enforcement to do that. If he didn't have an AR-15, it wouldn't matter what his mental health was. And so he's talking out of both sides of his mouth because he's also defunded a lot of mental health. But mental health is not quite the same wedge issue, identity issue that guns are. And so it is important for him to be able to keep up the ruse that we don't need any kind of gun control because that's what he's going to get elected on. And that's what he runs on.
So it's going to be a vote getter, is what you're saying. Jake Charles, do you agree?
With both of the other commentators about the blaming mental illness for incidents like that. One of my colleagues here at Duke, Jeffrey Swanson, who's in the School of Medicine and has done a lot of work on mental illness and violence and firearms, has a study that shows that if we eliminated all serious mental illness, we would decrease overall violence in the United States by about 4%. So the overwhelming majority of people with mental illness are not dangerous, and the overwhelming majority of instances of violence are not because someone has serious mental illness. Now, obviously, shooters who go up and kill many people are not well-adjusted individuals. They have problems, absolutely. And if this push by Governor Abbott was accompanied by trying to do something about woefully inadequate mental health care in the United States, and that would be a good thing. But I agree with the others that it's just not an accurate description of what is driving these kind of incidents.
Crystal Fleming, it may or may not have been an impulsive act. Again, it's early in the investigation, but what is certain is this timeline where earlier this month, the day after his birthday, he buys that first assault weapon. And that's what's been grabbing the headlines here in France as we've been watching this story unfold, is just that this was done legally.
Done legally, and with there being, and this is typical of these kinds of mass shootings, there's a long process that leads up to the massacres. Even if it ends up being determined that it was an impulsive decision, there's a chain of events that can be regulated, right? The sale of these weapons can be regulated. The fact that the governor has, scapegoated people with mental health concerns or use that as the framework is disgusting. I agree with the prior comments, it's inaccurate. Mental health is a concern around the globe. It is only in the United States that you see mass shootings of this frequency. It is only here. And to the earlier point, it is not the case that people with mental health concerns are always the perpetrators. And in fact, the opposite, that we see that the vast majority of people who have mental health diagnoses are not violent. But we do live in the United States. We are in a very violent society. Again, these are cultural and political problems with long roots. And I want to make an important point here, because this is, a shooting that took place, the 27th shooting in a school. When we look at that historical context, we see that the first children that were victimized by gun massacres in the United States, they were indigenous kids. Where's the recognition of that? The first kids that were terrorized by weapons, by guns, with slave patrols, those were Black kids. So yes, we have a contemporary issue, but it has historical roots. And those who are outraged, like I am, those who are concerned, the challenge is to turn that outrage into getting organized. Political scientists have shown that there are more gun clubs in the United States than McDonald's. Okay, so gun advocates are organized. So those who advocate for gun control and other kinds of what I think are public health policies, this is a moment to turn that outrage into getting organized and mobilized.
Getting organized and mobilized, but there's a lot of pessimism on that score. Let me ask you, Bree McEwen, because we've been watching these mass shootings taking place in the United States, this weaponization. We talked earlier about how it's a money-making enterprise. There's 375,000 people employed in the firearms industry in the United States. It's a huge number. At the same time, this entrepreneurial spirit that the Americans have that we don't always have here in Europe, is this a sign of an America in decline, what we're describing here? Or is it just the price Americans pay for their unruly sort of, cowboy system? That's how it sometimes seems from abroad.
It is the price that we pay for that idea that we can't be independent without, not being, unless we don't accept anybody telling us what to do or any kind of public health measures. It shouldn't be. Those parents should not have to pay that price so that someone can own a fun toy. And that is something that America is going to have to reckon with.
Andrew Goddard, is any change possible?
Yes, it is, but it won't happen until people realize that this is not an argument between nobody having guns ever and everybody having a gun all the time. This is an argument that needs to be placed right in the center there. Okay, some people can have guns for legitimate purposes, and some people shouldn't have them for any purpose. And that's right in the middle where unfortunately the polarization is not allowing us to go. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I don't want to stop people from being able to hunt. I'm not even that concerned with people keeping a firearm in the home, even though I personally believe that it's actually a detriment to do so to your safety. But unless we can get around this polarization and get people to come back, there's no polarization in the victims. The victims' political parties and the families' views on politics are not a factor. So why are they just for the politicians the biggest factor?
Andrew Goddard, many thanks.
They're sent to governors and to deal with the problems that are facing our country today, not in the late 1700s. And if they don't change their minds about what they are prepared to do in response to these things, then we'll have this continuation. It's just, again, not will it happen, it's when will it happen, where will it happen, and how many people will die. And that is not governance. That is not good enough.
Andrew Goddard, many thanks for joining us from Richmond. I want to thank Jake Charles in Durham, North Carolina, Crystal Fleming in New York, Bree McEwen. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.